Hello, my name's Lyle, and I wasn't supposed to survive my own family. They gave my brother a lake house paid in full. Me? I worked 3 jobs just to keep the heat on. My father looked me dead in the eye one winter and said, "Losers don't deserve roofs, they earn rain." And I believed him. Until Christmas Eve, when Grandpa asked a single question at dinner, and everything they'd buried came gasping to the surface. Turns out, roofs weren't the only thing they stole from me. So ask yourself, what happens when the black sheep finally stops staying quiet? Would you have stood up or walked out like I did? It was close to 6 in the morning when I clocked out of the gas station. The night shift always left me hollow, hands smelling like diesel, eyes stinging from the buzzing fluorescent lights. The cold drizzle had turned the streets into ribbons of dull silver. My jacket wasn't thick enough for November, but that was nothing new. I walked back to my basement apartment, the kind landlords list as a studio, though it's really a glorified storage room with a sink. Inside, I kicked off my boots, set my keys on the wobbly table, and stared at the ceiling. The leak had found a new spot overnight. A slow drip hit the rim of the bucket, steady as a heartbeat. I grabbed a roll of duct tape and a square of plastic, patched it like I always did. My whole life felt like that. Patchwork fixes for cracks I didn't create. I whispered my father's words under my breath, the way some people whisper prayers. Losers don't deserve roofs. They earn rain. He said that once when I was 16, after I dented his truck backing out of the driveway. Somehow the phrase stuck harder than the slap that came after it. Every drop that hit the bucket now sounded like that sentence falling again. I showered, ate cereal straight from the box, then sat on the edge of my bed scrolling through my phone. Missed calls, unknown number. One voicemail, "Mom." I hit play. Her voice was bright, coated with cheer that always felt a little too polished. "Hey, honey, your brother's housewarming is next week. You can come if you have time off. We know you're busy with whatever it is you do. Anyway, your father says hi. Don't be a stranger." I laughed once, a small, sharp sound that bounced off the damp walls. "Whatever it is you do." Yeah, that sounded right. I checked my account balance, $28 and some change. Enough for gas, maybe one dinner that didn't come from a vending machine. Scrolling through old photos, I stopped at one from last year, a picture of a house foundation I'd poured concrete for. Strong, level, solid. I remembered working through a thunderstorm that day, rain soaking through my boots while I covered the mix with tarps. The developer posted that house on their website later, shiny and new, credited to someone else. My name wasn't there. I didn't even expect it to be. That night I pulled on my only decent shirt, the one with sleeves that still held their color, and drove to my parents' home. The closer I got, the cleaner the lawns became. Street by street, the houses grew larger, their windows glowing with warm light. By the time I turned into their driveway, it felt like I'd crossed into another planet. Mom opened the door before I could knock. "You made it," she said, her smile wide, but her eyes already drifting over my shoulder toward the guests behind me. I held out a small potted plant wrapped in brown paper. "For the new house," I said. "Oh, that's sweet," she murmured, placing it on the floor near the umbrella stand, already forgotten. Inside, the smell of roasted meat and cinnamon candles filled the air. The dining room gleamed, crystal glasses, silverware aligned like soldiers. My brother Grant stood at the end of the table, talking loudly, arm around his wife's shoulder. He looked like every picture-perfect man the world rewards for simply existing. "Lyle," he said, grinning as if we'd just bumped into each other at the grocery store. "Still working nights, huh?" "3 jobs, actually." I forced a smile. "Dedication," he said, not meaning it. "Dad says you always were the stubborn one." Dad, Harlan Mercer, sat at the head of the table, a king surveying his small kingdom. His voice cut through the chatter. "Everyone, a toast." He raised his glass, the crystal catching the chandelier light. "To Grant, the homeowner of the year. We bought him his first roof." The room erupted in claps and laughter. My chest went tight. Harlan turned to me, smirking. "And you, son? Still renting that basement?" "Yes, sir," I said, my voice even. He leaned back, pleased with himself. "Well, some people earn roofs, others earn rain." The laughter that followed didn't stop quickly. Even Grant chuckled before muttering, "Come on, Dad, that's rough." But no one stopped him. No one ever did. I looked down at my plate. The food blurred. My fork slipped, clattering against porcelain. My mother's hand twitched as if she might say something, but she didn't. The room stayed bright, warm, and full of people pretending not to see the punchland. "I need some air," I said quietly. Outside, the drizzle had turned heavier, soft mist becoming real rain. I stepped off the porch, hands in my pockets, and tilted my face up. The cold drops stung like little truths. Somewhere behind me, laughter carried through the open window. "Losers earn rain," I whispered. Then, under my breath, almost smiling, "Guess I've earned a flood." That was my rebellion. Not loud, not dramatic, just mine. The kind that doesn't make headlines but changes something inside you. By the time I got back to my apartment, it was nearly midnight. I kicked the door shut behind me. The bucket was half full again. I dumped it into the sink, the splash echoing against the concrete walls. The reflection in the water shimmered with each ripple. My face looked strange, older than 37 maybe. I leaned closer and said softly, "A roof's not what keeps you dry. It's what keeps you seen." For a moment, I just stood there, listening to the quiet drip begin again. Then came a sound that didn't belong, the faint shuffle of paper sliding against the floor. Someone had slipped an envelope under the door. It was thick, old-fashioned, yellowed at the edges. My name, written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Grandpa Eldon Wexler. I knelt, fingers hovering before I touched it. Somehow the air felt heavier, like the whole room was waiting. I had no idea that envelope would split my life clean in two. The envelope felt heavier than it looked, as if years had been folded inside it. I carried it to the small table under the single yellow bulb that hummed above my head. My hands were damp, not from the rain this time, but from something closer to dread. The paper had gone soft at the corners, the ink faintly smudged. I could still recognize the handwriting, neat and deliberate, the kind of penmanship schools don't teach anymore. Grandpa Eldon's. I slid a finger under the seal, slow, afraid I might break something sacred. The letter unfolded with a whisper, like it had been waiting for air. "To my grandson Lyle, the one who builds with his hands and his heart. Someday you'll understand what your father never could. There are roofs made of wood and there are roofs made of worth." I read it twice, maybe 3 times. The words didn't just sit on the page, they reached out. He'd written this long before he passed, maybe when I was still too young to understand what he was trying to leave behind. For a while I just sat there staring at the letter. The drip from the ceiling kept its rhythm. Outside, a car passed through the puddled street, tires hissing. I folded the letter back with care, but something inside the envelope shifted. A small, stiff corner brushing my finger. There was more. I pulled out another piece, smaller, folded twice. It was thicker, with a faint, musty smell of paper that had lived in drawers for too long. A photocopy. My breath caught when I saw the heading. Property deed. The signature line read, Eldon Wexler, Sr. The property location, a rural address in Missouri. And right below that, my name, Lyle Mercer. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Grandpa had left me a house. Not a word about it from my parents all these years. I stared at the page again, scanning the date. 5 years before he passed. Then, near the bottom, a new signature in another handwriting. Harlan Wexler, stamped in dull red ink. Transferred. Transferred to Grant Wexler. I set the page down slowly. My hands felt cold. The ceiling dripped again, and this time the sound made me angry. "He left me a house," I whispered, "and they took it." It was like someone had erased me with one neat stroke of a pen. The night turned longer. I couldn't stay still. I pulled out a small notebook I used for work receipts and started checking the dates. My father must have gone to court after the funeral. That thought led me back to that day, the day I wasn't allowed to say goodbye. I saw it like it was yesterday. The rain was relentless that morning. I drove 6 hours from Illinois, cheap coffee in the cup holder, black suit hanging from the back seat. When I arrived at the cemetery, the gate was half closed. A man I recognized from my father's company stood there under an umbrella. "Sorry, son," he'd said, looking anywhere but at me. "Family-only service." "I am family." He hesitated, then shook his head. "Harlan's orders." I remember standing there, the rain running into my collar, watching from across the road as they lowered the casket. No one saw me wave. No one looked back. The rain came down so hard that day it drowned my voice. Now, sitting in my small room years later, the same sound echoed off the walls, the same cold pressed through the window. Maybe the rain remembered what they'd done, even if no one else did. The next morning, after a few hours of restless sleep, I decided to find out the truth. I left the apartment and drove into town, to the small local branch where Grandpa had once kept his accounts. The building hadn't changed, same cracked steps, same bell that chimed too loudly when you opened the door. Miriam Haynes still worked there. She'd been the estate clerk when Eldon passed. I wasn't sure she'd remember me, but she did. Her eyes softened as soon as I said his name. "Eldon was a good man," she said. "Always came in with that old hat and a pocket full of candy for the tellers." I smiled faintly. "He wrote me a letter. I think he meant for me to have something, a property. But my father—" She looked around, lowered her voice. "You probably shouldn't be asking me this here." "I'm not asking for money," I said. "Just the truth." For a moment she hesitated. Then she pulled out an old binder, flipping through pages until she found the estate log. Her finger stopped at my grandfather's file. "I probably shouldn't be saying this," she whispered. "But yes, he left you that property in Missouri. He told me himself, said you were the only one who understood what real work was." She paused, voice trembling. "Then your father came in 2 weeks later with new documents. Said there'd been a clerical mistake. I was young then. I didn't question it." My throat tightened. "He forged it?" She shut the folder slowly. "Let's just say, he made sure you'd never know." The words hit me harder than any insult ever had. I thanked her quietly and stepped back outside. The sky had darkened again, heavy with rain. Of course it had. Back home, I spread everything across the table, the letter, the deed copy, a few old pay stubs. The leak above had grown worse, and a drop landed right on the corner of the deed. The ink blurred slightly, as if the paper itself wanted to weep. I didn't move it. I let the rain mark it, proof that even water could tell the truth. "If rain's what I earn," I said to no one, "I'll make it count." I slipped the documents into a clear binder, labeled it with a piece of masking tape, Eldon's Roof. Then I tucked it inside a drawer, the kind I'd have to kick twice to close. Later that night, I sat with a pen in hand and wrote a short letter to my father. "Dad, you can keep the house, but I'm done earning your rain." I folded it and placed it inside the same envelope Grandpa's letter came in. Then I slid it into the pocket of my work jacket. By dawn, the rain had slowed to a mist. The phone buzzed on the table, startling me. Unknown number again. I answered anyway. "Hey, bro," Grant's voice said, casual as ever. "Dad wants you at Christmas dinner this year. Said Grandpa left something for the family. Don't be late." For a second, I didn't answer. I just looked through the cracked window at the gray clouds rolling in again. Same rain, same family, but not the same man. I whispered, "Don't worry. I won't be late." The call ended, and I sat there for a while, phone still in hand, watching the screen go black. The apartment felt even smaller than usual, walls closing in, air thick with everything unsaid. Outside, the rain turned to sleet, tapping sharper against the window pane. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I tossed my work jacket over the kitchen chair and brewed some coffee. Not because I needed it, but because something about routine kept me steady. I stood by the sink, sipping slowly, watching traffic slide past on the wet street. By noon, I was on the road, headed back to Springfield for the first time in months. I didn't rush. There was no point. The highway stretched out like it had something to prove, and the clouds above weren't letting go of the rain anytime soon. Snow had started to mix in, turning the shoulders of the road into dirty slush. The roofs on houses sparkled in patches of sleet-coated glass, untouched from a distance, but I knew better. Funny thing about roofs. From the street, they look whole, solid, safe. Get up close, though, and the cracks show, the leaks, the rot under fresh shingles. The closer I got to the Wexler house, the more that metaphor clung to me. That place had looked like a fortress when I was a kid. Now it felt more like a set piece, hollow inside, like a stage with too much lighting and no soul. I parked by the curb. The front porch was strung with the same white lights they used every Christmas, wrapped just tight enough to feel more rigid than festive. I stood there for a second, adjusting my collar, taking in a deep breath before knocking. Grant opened the door, decked in a brand-name sweater, cologne too strong for this kind of weather. "Man, you made it," Didn't think you'd show. His voice sounded rehearsed. Neither did I said. He stepped aside and I walked into the house. The smell of pine and cinnamon hit me like a memory I didn't ask for. Celeste came around the corner, arms open. There you are, she said, giving me a quick hug. Then her eyes darted over my shoulder like she expected someone more interesting to show up. The house gleamed. Marble floors so clean you'd think no one walked on them. Gold-rimmed glasses, table settings folded like hotel napkins. And there it was, the long dining table, name cards at every place. I scanned them. None for me. Oops, said Grant's wife from across the room, raising her wine glass. Must have run out of ink. The room chuckled, not loud, just enough to let it sting. I didn't react. I walked over to the counter, grabbed a spare chair from the kitchen, and slid it into an open spot without a word. We sat down. Chatter buzzed. Grant talking about stock options, his new SUV, someone from Celeste's garden club gushing about Florida weather. Then came the toasts. Harland raised his glass. To Grant, my son who's kept the Wexler name proud, who built a home, a legacy. You're what a man should be. I didn't look up. A cousin piped up. And what about you, Lyle? Still fixing sinks and gutters? Harland didn't even let me answer. Oh, he's freelancing. Sort of a handyman these days. The table laughed politely again. I took a bite of roasted carrots just to keep from speaking. Celeste cleared her throat. Speaking of legacy, we'll be reading Grandpa Eldon's final instructions on Christmas Day. He left something for the family. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. Legacy. The one you buried under paperwork. The dinner went on, but I wasn't really in it anymore. My chair felt like it was miles from the table. The voices around me blurred into a hum. After dessert, something almond and too sweet, I slipped out onto the back porch. The snow had turned back into rain. It tapped on the railing, dripped from the gutters in a rhythm that sounded too much like memory. I reached into my coat pocket and gripped the binder I'd labeled Eldon's Roof. Inside were the letter, the deed, and everything else that mattered more than this dinner ever would. You don't fight storms by shouting, I muttered to myself. You build your own roof. A click behind me. Grant stepped out, lighting a cigar with hands too soft for any real work. You good, man? He asked, puffing. Dad's tough, yeah, but he means well. You know how he is. I didn't even turn to look at him. I stopped knowing who he was the day he called me a loser. He laughed, tight and awkward. Geez, that was ages ago. You know how he talks. Don't take it so personal. I let the silence carry my answer. Eventually, he flicked the ash and went back inside. I stayed out there, letting the rain mist over my face. The porch light flickered slightly, then steadied. Back in the car, I sat behind the wheel for a moment, watching my breath fog the windshield. Then the phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered. Mr. Mercer? The voice asked. Male, calm, professional. I'm calling regarding a property dispute involving the late Eldon Wexler's estate. You may want to hear this in person. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. Outside, the rain picked up, harder now, smearing the Christmas lights in liquid color. Rain never lies, I whispered. I started the engine and drove off into it. By the time I reached Jefferson City, the rain hadn't let up once. The wipers dragged across the windshield in slow, heavy arcs, pushing aside water that just kept coming back. I parked in front of a small brick building wedged between a dry cleaner and a diner. A fading gold plaque on the door read, Diane Ketterman, Attorney at Law. Inside, the place smelled of old coffee and damp paper. The floor creaked when I stepped in. Shelves lined the walls, each one stuffed with folders labeled in neat handwriting, decades of other people's secrets. A woman in her late 50s looked up from behind a cluttered desk. Short hair, gray at the temples, eyes sharp behind glasses that didn't soften a thing. Mr. Mercer? She asked. That's me, I said, shaking the rain off my coat. She nodded toward the chair across from her. You came a long way. I appreciate that. I sat. She slid a thin yellow folder across the desk. The paper inside had that old paper smell, half ink, half dust. This came up in an estate audit, she said. Your grandfather's name triggered it. I think you'll want to see what's in there. My hands hesitated before opening it. Inside were two sets of documents. The first was familiar, a photocopy of Eldon Wexler's will. The second, a revised version, The first line caught me. I leave my Missouri property to my grandson, Lyle Mercer. Then the next document, dated only 3 days before Eldon's death, said the opposite. I hereby transfer ownership to my eldest grandson, Grant Wexler. Something in me went cold. Diane leaned forward, tapping the page with a pen. See that signature? Look at the loop in the E. I leaned closer. Yeah, it's shaky. Too shaky, she said. I compared this to his earlier signatures. The man who signed this wasn't steady. According to hospital records, Eldon couldn't even hold a pen that week. It took me a few seconds to find my voice. You're saying my father forged it, she sighed. I'm saying this second will was likely filed after your grandfather passed. Someone wanted it to look clean. I stared at the paper, feeling my pulse climb in my throat. Can you prove it? Enough to raise questions, she said. Not enough for a conviction, yet. That word hung between us. I sat back, looking at the rain sliding down her office window, each droplet dragging another with it. He stole a dying man's signature, I said quietly, and then called it family business. She didn't argue. Lawyers rarely do. They just wait. I rubbed my hands together. They were trembling slightly. He kept me from seeing Grandpa, didn't he? Her expression softened. That part I can't tell you, but I've seen this pattern before. Families rewrite truth with paperwork. Her words cracked something open in me. My memory drifted back to that winter, years ago, when I called Mom, asking if I could visit Eldon in the hospital. Don't come, sweetie, she'd said. He's resting. Seeing you might upset him. I believed her. I stayed home that weekend. Now I understood. They hadn't been protecting him. They were protecting their plan. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Rain tapped faster against the glass, a steady percussion that filled the silence between us. Diane broke it first. If you go after this, it'll tear your family apart. Your father's reputation, your brother's comfort, it all goes with it. I looked her straight in the eye. They tore me apart first. She studied me for a moment, then nodded slightly. Then I'll help you quietly. You'll need certified copies. I can get those, but be careful, Lyle. If your father suspects you know, he'll bury the rest. Let him try, I said. Just as she was gathering the documents, she paused. There's one more thing you should know. She opened a drawer, pulled out a bank statement, and slid it toward me. Your father withdrew a special inheritance loan 2 days after Eldon passed. In your name. I blinked. In my name? She nodded. He used your social security number, signed your initials. If anyone ever checks, it'll look like you took money from the estate. I stared at the line item. Loan issued, $42,500. My chest tightened. That's fraud. It's more than that, Diane said softly. It's identity theft. But again, proving it will take time. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of her desk. I don't care how long it takes. She handed me copies of everything, each page marked with her initials. Then start building your own roof, Mr. Mercer. By the time I stepped outside, the rain had turned to a heavy downpour. I drove in silence, headlights cutting through sheets of water. The hum of the tires and the rhythm of the rain blended together, steady and dark. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Grant. I hit play through the car speaker. See you Christmas Eve, bro. Dad's got a surprise this year. A humorless laugh escaped me. Yeah, I said under my breath. Me too. The rain hit harder, drumming against the windshield like applause. I kept driving, the highway a blur of wet lights. When I finally pulled into my building's small parking lot, the storm had quieted into a soft drizzle. Inside, I set the yellow folder on the table next to the binder labeled Eldon's Roof. Then I saw it, an old photograph tucked under a stack of bills. Grandpa and me years ago standing under a half-built roof. I must have been 12. He was smiling, holding a hammer, sunlight on his face. You built the roof, I whispered. I'll make sure they can't live under it anymore. The phone on the table buzzed again. Incoming call. Dad. I stared at the name on the screen. Heart steady now, not racing. I picked it up and brought it to my ear. What do you want, Dad? The voice that came through wasn't angry. It was calm, cold, calculated. Son, he said, we need to talk about what you think you know. There was a pause on the line after his words, long enough to let me know he was choosing them carefully. Son, Harlan said again, this time with forced softness. Let's not drag old wounds through Christmas. Your mother wants peace this year. No drama. I sat still, staring out the window. Snow had begun to fall, blanketing the cracked sidewalk below in something that almost looked pure. I didn't bring the drama, Dad, I said, voice flat. I just survived it. He didn't respond right away. Just a breath, then the click of disconnection. I set the phone down and let the silence settle. It wasn't the warm kind. It was the kind that presses on your chest, makes the walls seem closer than they are. Outside, the rain was gone, replaced by slow, steady flakes, falling in quiet spirals. The city moved slower beneath it, like everyone was pretending things were still normal. I walked to the small kitchen, poured myself a cup of black coffee, then sat back down at the table. Diane's folder lay there, unopened since the night before. I didn't need to look inside. I already knew what it held. Instead, my eyes drifted to the wall across from me. The paint was chipped. One of the outlets sparked sometimes when I plugged the toaster in. It was nothing like the house Grant got. 3 winters ago, I was sleeping in my truck just a few blocks from that house. I'd pick up shifts at the warehouse during the day, pour concrete in the evenings, and wipe down counters at the diner from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Didn't matter how tired I was, I just kept moving. I figured if I worked hard enough, eventually something would break through. But nothing did. I didn't hate them for it, I said out loud. I just thought maybe they were right. Maybe losers do earn rain. But it wasn't the weather that soaked me. It was their decisions. Every cold night, every ignored message, every fake smile at Thanksgiving. That wasn't fate. That was family. A knock pulled me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find Derek standing there, cheeks red from the cold, holding a thermos. Figured you could use something stronger than gas station coffee, he said, handing it to me. I let him in. We sat in silence for a moment, the way men do when something needs saying but doesn't want to be said. You ever hear of Wexler Realty Group? He asked finally. I nodded. My dad's baby. Started it right before Grandpa passed. Well, he said, taking a sip, I did some work for them a while back. Demolition jobs, zoning contracts, stuff that should have gone through permits, but didn't always. I raised an eyebrow. He's been moving property under shell companies, Derek said. Selling off land fast, LLCs with different names but same mailing address. Cleaning house. Looks like it. And guess whose name was tied to one of the transaction logs? I didn't have to guess. I kept records, he added. Old pay slips, email chains. If you need someone to back you up, I'm not scared of him. I looked at him, not as a coworker, as a witness, as proof I wasn't losing my mind. Thanks, Derek. That means more than you know. He left shortly after, the steam from the thermos still rising as he stepped back into the snow. I turned toward the mirror near the coat rack. Just a quick glance, but it stopped me cold. I looked older, not in a tired way, in a changed way. They taught me shame, I said to my reflection. I learned silence. But now I know, silence builds walls, and I've been living under theirs for too long. The plan was simple. No yelling, no begging, just truth, steady and sharp. I pulled on my coat and tucked Diane's documents into the inside pocket. It was almost noon when I pulled out of the driveway. The snow had thickened, but the roads were manageable. I drove past the diner, past the spot where I used to sleep, past all the pieces of me I used to believe were broken. The Wexler mansion came into view slowly, just like it always had. Its stone columns were wrapped in garland, windows glowing like everything inside was perfect. Through the glass, I saw Grant tossing something to a kid, probably one of Celeste's nephews. Harlan stood behind him, arms crossed, pacing like he was inspecting a stage. Celeste was setting out silverware, smiling in that polished way she always did. I parked on the curb. The engine hummed for a minute before I turned the key. I'm not coming to fight, I whispered, gripping the steering wheel. I'm coming to finish. Just as I reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One line of text. Don't show them everything yet. There's more you don't know. Meet me after dinner. I stared at the message, read it twice. Then once more. Someone else knew. Someone inside. I slipped the phone into my coat and stepped out into the snow. The mansion loomed before me. If tonight's the storm, I muttered, I'll walk straight into it. Just then, the front door swung open. Grant's voice rang out across the yard. "Hey, little brother, you made it." Grant's voice cut through the cold like he was welcoming me to a barbecue, not the battlefield we both knew this night would become. I nodded, forced a thin smile, and stepped inside. Warmth wrapped around me the moment I crossed the threshold, but not the kind that invited you to stay. The fire crackled in the ornate hearth. Christmas music hummed softly from hidden speakers. Everything looked like a postcard, candles flickering, garland perfectly draped, gold-edged china already set at the table. The smell of roasted ham and cinnamon floated through the air, but underneath it all was something sharper, tension, polished into a sheen. Celeste appeared from the hallway holding 2 flutes of champagne. She handed me one without much eye contact. "You look, well," she said, eyes flicking down to my boots. "Still working with your hands?" I raised my glass in a mock toast. "They haven't fallen off yet." She gave a brief laugh, more like a breath, and disappeared toward the kitchen. The dining room was full but quiet when I entered. There were name cards at each seat. Grant, Celeste, Harlan, the kids, even Aunt Miriam, who hadn't been in town for years. Every seat had a place, except mine. Harlan stood near the head of the table, glass of scotch in hand. "Sit wherever you fit, son," he said, motioning to the far end. I took the empty spot near the wall, folding my coat over the back of the chair. No one made a move to talk. It was all smiles and sips and glances passed over roasted vegetables and silver platters. Then, Grant stood and tapped his glass with a fork. "To family," he began, the room lifting their glasses. "To roofs that never leak and names that never fade." Polite laughter trickled around the table. I raised mine slowly, the rim resting just at my lips. My hand tightened around the stem. That's when Harlan cleared his throat and pulled a gift-wrapped envelope from under the tree. "Thought we'd do this one early," he said, walking it over to Grant. "A little token for loyalty and success." Grant took it with a grin, unwrapping it slowly like a showman. He held up the contents, a crisp title deed to a lake house. Cheers erupted. Celeste clapped. I felt the sting in my chest like someone had scraped a raw nerve. I recognized the parcel number, Eldon's land, the one that was supposed to be mine, the one his will had promised me. I stared at the document like it was a piece of evidence on fire. Flash. Years ago. Grandpa Eldon and I standing under that big oak near the lake. "One day, this land will be yours, son. You'll know how to keep it alive." His voice echoed in my head, steady and warm. Now Grant was waving it like a trophy. My hands gripped the table edge so tightly I thought the wood might crack. Harlan leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "See, Lyle, Grant earned his roof. Some of us build, some just patch leaks." Laughter again, quieter this time. Celeste smirked behind her wineglass. Even the kids seemed unsure if they were supposed to laugh. That sentence, that same damned sentence, it was the one he'd used when I asked for help during the recession. It was the line he threw out when I said I was sleeping in my truck. I stood up. No shaking, no shouting. "You're right, Dad," I said, sliding my hand into my coat pocket. "Some roofs don't leak, they rot from the inside." I placed the folded copy of the original deed on the table in front of him. The room went completely silent. Even the background music seemed to dim. "Funny thing," I continued, "Eldon left that land to me. Guess some roofs don't keep secrets either." Harlan blinked, mouth opening slightly. Grant's hand slowly lowered the champagne glass. Celeste froze like someone had hit pause on her whole body. Harlan picked up the paper with 2 fingers, like it might bite him. He glanced over it, scoffing. "You think you can stroll in here with fake documents and ruin Christmas?" His voice was sharp, but I heard the tremble underneath. "I didn't fake anything," I said. "Diane Ketterman has the originals. Hospital logs say Grandpa couldn't hold a pen the day this so-called updated version was signed." Grant looked between us, whispering something I couldn't catch. Harlan didn't care. "No," he said harshly. "Let him finish his tantrum." I sat back down, calm as ever. I looked at each face around the table, people who had ignored me, pitied me, used me. "You always said I earned rain. Maybe you were right, because rain washes things clean." I let that sit a moment before leaning forward slightly. "If you're so sure this is fake, Dad, then tell me one thing. Why did Grandpa write me into his will at all?" The silence that followed was worse than yelling. Even Aunt Miriam looked uncomfortable. The chandelier above us buzzed softly. Celeste set her glass down, suddenly very interested in her napkin. Then Harlan slammed his fist on the table. A wine glass shattered near the end, red streaking across the white tablecloth. "Enough!" Grant flinched. One of the kids cried out. Celeste gasped. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Harlan's chest heaved, his eyes drilling into mine. But the fire was gone from them. What was left looked a lot like fear. And then, under the table, my phone buzzed. I kept my gaze on Harlan as I slid it out. One message from that same unknown number. "Check your grandfather's safe before midnight. They'll destroy everything." I stood slowly, buttoning my coat. "Excuse me," I said to no one in particular. And then I walked out, and I didn't rush, didn't slam the door or throw my coat over my shoulder. I just moved, steady and quiet, like a man who'd finally decided which direction to walk after standing still for too long. Behind me, the muffled sounds of silverware clinking and hushed voices faded as I stepped deeper into the hallway. The house was dim now. The guests were leaving or lingering awkwardly, pretending not to notice the shattered glass and what it meant. Celeste's voice floated faintly from the dining room. "He's losing it." Of course I was. Losing the lies, the shame, the smallness they'd wrapped around me for decades. The Christmas lights lining the hallway windows flickered as I passed. Their red and gold reflections shimmered on the glass like tiny fires, dancing in rhythm with the anger building in my chest. Funny, they still thought I came here to be saved. I turned toward the staircase. The second floor was colder, quieter. Eldon's old study hadn't changed much. Dark wood panels, stiff leather chairs, a faint trace of tobacco still clinging to the air like memory. Harlan had taken over the space years ago, but the bones of the room were still my grandfather's. Behind the desk, half covered in files and binders, sat the old safe. It looked smaller than I remembered, just a gray box tucked away in the shadows. But I could still see the scratch across the top, the one I'd made as a kid trying to help Eldon with his taxes. I dropped to one knee, fingers brushing dust from the dial. The number came back to me without effort. 1932, Eldon's birth year. The lock clicked. Inside was a stack of folded papers, a sealed envelope, and a small black USB drive resting on top like it had been waiting. I took everything out slowly, heart thudding steady now, not from fear, but from clarity. I opened the envelope last. Scrawled in Eldon's familiar script were 5 words. To be opened if integrity fails. There was no mistaking what this was. I plugged the USB into my laptop. Files populated the screen. Scans, financial records, copies of documents with Harlan's name signed over figures that didn't belong to him, deeds rerouted, bank transfers masked under LLCs, not just mistakes, intentional deception. And there it was, my name, tied to loans and titles I never saw, forged. He hadn't just stolen from Eldon. He'd used me to do it. My mouth felt dry. I leaned back in the chair, blinking hard. And that's when I heard the creak. The door was open. Harlan stood in the frame, arms folded. No smirk, no fire. Just that calculating stillness he wore when he knew something was slipping from his grip. "Looking for something, son?" I closed the laptop lid gently, keeping the drive in my hand. "You always were a snoop," he said, stepping inside. "Even as a kid, you'd dig through my drawers looking for proof you were special." I stood up. "I wasn't looking for proof, Dad. Just the truth." He moved closer. The light from the hallway cut across his face, half in shadow, half illuminated. A man split in two. "You think this junk will change anything?" He snatched the sealed envelope from the desk and ripped it open, scattering its contents across the floor. One letter fluttered to a stop at his feet, addressed to me. "You're still the boy who begged for scraps at my table." "No," I said. "I was the one who built your roof. You just took credit for keeping it dry." He lunged. His hand shot toward the drive. I stepped back, but not fast enough. He grabbed my wrist, twisting hard. I gritted my teeth, the USB falling from my grip, sliding under the leather armchair. I dropped to the floor, scrambling for it. He kicked, hard, his boot connecting with my ribs. The impact knocked the wind out of me, sent me crashing into the side of the desk. Papers flew. A lamp toppled. I could barely breathe, but I saw it, just under the edge of the chair. I reached. Then, "Harlan, Celeste." She stood in the doorway, her face pale, her voice sharp. He froze. He can't find out what's on that drive, she said. I stopped moving. What? Harlan turned to her, confused. You said we'd never need to open the safe, she hissed. Her eyes darted to me, and in that split second I saw it all. Not just complicity or silence, but action. She wasn't protecting him. She had helped make it happen. The notary, the signature, she didn't deny it. I stood up slowly, the USB now clenched in my palm. You called it integrity, Mom. She blinked, swallowed. Guess we don't even speak the same language. The room went dark, literally. The power flickered, then cut out for a few seconds, long enough for shadows to stretch and twist across the walls. Long enough to remind us that the truth wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. When the lights flickered back on, I was already moving. I pushed past them, down the stairs, through the front door. Outside, the rain had returned. Not a downpour, but steady, unrelenting, cold. It soaked my clothes in seconds. But I didn't stop. Behind me, the mansion glowed through the mist, its Christmas lights sputtering like a dying heartbeat. They built their empire on a dead man's name. I'll finish it with the truth. In my truck, hands shaking, I plugged the drive into my laptop again. This time I didn't just read. I uploaded everything. To Clara Dorsey, the reporter who'd once taken down a sitting mayor over zoning fraud. Then I picked up my phone. One message sent. Got it. Now what? No reply. Just the rain. I leaned back, closed my eyes. Let the storm take the rest. Tomorrow's Christmas. Let's see who still has a roof left standing. I leaned my head against the cold window of the truck. The heater had long given up and my breath fogged the glass. Outside, a blanket of snow had softened the world, covering everything in a deceptive calm. But underneath, fires were starting. And I didn't need to strike a match. They were already lit. I hadn't slept. Just sat there through the night, watching the town stir beneath gray clouds. My phone buzzed again, and I picked it up with a hand still stiff from the scuffle. The headline glared back at me. Wexler Empire under investigation. Shocking evidence of estate fraud released overnight. A second alert followed, then a third. They were everywhere now. News apps, local channels, Facebook feeds, Harlan's face, Celeste's too. Words like embezzlement, forgery, inheritance fraud followed them like shadows. The photos weren't flattering, snapped at fundraisers, galas, press events where they looked untouchable. Not anymore. I stared out at the river. Calm, wide, unmoved. That same river I'd once parked beside in the dead of winter, bundled in a borrowed coat, wondering how I'd survive the week. And now, this same place watched me bring down the house that tried to bury me. A knock startled me. I turned. Clara Dorsey stood outside, bundled tight, coffee in one hand, press badge around her neck. I cracked the window. You okay? She asked gently. As close as I get, I said. She handed me the coffee without asking. I took it. I wanted to thank you, she said, nodding toward the glove box where the USB still sat. That kind of courage doesn't come easy. I shrugged. Did what needed doing. She hesitated. You know, I didn't send that first text. That made me look up. She continued, I was already sniffing around the Wexlers, but someone else tipped me off before you did. I narrowed my eyes. Who? She pulled out her phone, tapped a button, and let a voicemail play. If they ever take what's his, tell Lyle Mercer, he'll know what to do. Let the truth be your shelter. The voice hit me like a punch to the ribs. Grandpa Eldon. My throat tightened. She added, his lawyer reached out. Said Eldon left instructions if the estate was ever tampered with. He set a trigger, silent but precise. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. In that moment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt seen, protected, like the roof I'd lost had been over me all along, just invisible until now. Clara squeezed my shoulder before walking back toward her car. You did good, Lyle. As she drove off, I sat there listening to the engine fade, fingers curled around the edge of the paper coffee cup. The heat burned a little, but it grounded me. That was when I heard tires crunching the snow behind me, a black SUV. Grant. I stepped out of the truck before he reached me. He slammed the door shut behind him, eyes wild. You ruined us. No, I said calmly. You did that when you lied. You think you're better now because you ratted out your family? I didn't rat, I said. I stopped being afraid. He lunged, fist hit jaw. I stumbled, not unexpected. I retaliated, not out of anger, but clarity. We fought in the snow like brothers who never really were. Clumsy, angry, long overdue. My knuckles scraped, his lips split. Snow turned red beneath us. A neighbor shouted. Another pulled out a phone. He swung wide. I ducked, drove my shoulder into his chest, and sent him sprawling. Breathless, he looked up. You think people will forget? No, I said, standing over him. They'll remember exactly who you are. Sirens in the distance. Police pulled up. They pulled Grant to his feet, cuffed him. He didn't resist. Just stared at me like I was the stranger. Maybe I was. Or maybe I'd finally come home as the man I was meant to be. As they drove away, I stood there, blood on my lip, bruises blooming down my ribs, and the first drops of rain fell. Not snow now. Rain. Soft, cold, honest. I tilted my head back. Maybe losers do earn rain. But at least now, I'd earned mine with my own hands. By late afternoon, the town had quieted. Rain washed away most of the snow. The streets were slick, reflecting twinkling lights and dark windows. I drove out to the cemetery just before sundown. Eldon's grave sat under a maple tree, stripped bare now. I stepped out, still limping a little, and pulled something from my coat pocket. A cloth napkin from the night before. The one Celeste handed me like I was a guest in a home that should have been mine. The initials were wrong, stitched in gold, like every lie they ever told. I placed it gently on the stone. Guess the old roof finally collapsed, Grandpa, I said. But I'm still standing. The rain stopped. For once, it wasn't dramatic. It just ended. Left the air clean. I sat beside the grave for a while, listening to the wind, to the quiet. My phone buzzed once. The lawyer again. Voicemail. Lyle, there's one more thing. One of the files from the USB. It's encrypted. We think it may be the real reason Eldon never confronted Harland outright. You need to see it. I didn't move for a long moment, because I knew it wasn't over yet. Even with the rain behind me and the headlines still smoldering across town, there was a quiet I couldn't trust. A silence that didn't quite settle, like a room after a loud argument, where the echo still clings to the walls. It was New Year's Eve now. 1 week exactly since the storm broke. The world outside had changed. Frost along the eaves, children in knit hats tossing snowballs on the corner, the faint sound of Sinatra crooning from someone's porch radio. But inside my small rental, 2 bedrooms, leaky pipes, heat that wheezed louder than it warmed, it was just me, a toolbox, and a stubborn faucet. I crouched under the sink, wrench in hand, focused on the drip, drip, drip that had kept me up the night before. There was something simple about it, honest. Water leaking for no reason but gravity, no pretense, no betrayal. The radio on the counter muttered through static. Wexler Realty dissolving under financial probe. Harland Wexler remains under observation after a reported health crisis. I tightened the last bolt, stood up slowly, and turned the handle. No more dripping. I let out a breath. For the first time, I said to no one, their world is falling apart, and mine's holding steady. After lunch, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the old laptop. The USB still stuck out the side. The encrypted file was waiting, just like the lawyer said. I stared at the password prompt, tried birthdays, house addresses, nothing. Then I remembered Grandpa Eldon's voice, his favorite phrase. I typed, integrity over inheritance. The screen blinked, then loaded. Inside the folder, just one document. It was a letter. Not to me, to Harland. You've forgotten what roofs are for. They're not trophies. They're shelter for those who build them with care. My chest tightened. The letter went on, page after page, outlining Eldon's true intention. He had originally planned to leave the estate jointly to both Harland and me, with a condition. We were to work together to restore the abandoned housing for veterans on the east side of town. No money unless we worked side by side, brick by brick. But Harlan had rewritten the will, forged the update, cut me out entirely to keep control. It had never been about choosing one of us. Eldon was trying to redeem both of us. I closed the laptop gently, not from anger, not even sadness, just understanding. Around 4 p.m., I got in the truck and drove to the edge of town. The veteran home sat like forgotten bones, broken porches, cracked windows, gutters hanging like ribbons from the eaves. A ghost neighborhood. I got out, walked through the snow-packed sidewalk, past the empty lots, my breath clouded in the cold. "You wanted roofs that meant something, Grandpa," I whispered. "Maybe that's where I'll start. Not court battles, not revenge. This restoration. I made a silent promise, what's left of the inheritance, what I could salvage from the mess. It would go here. A beginning, not an ending." By dusk, I was back home, peeling off my boots when I heard a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find Celeste. No pearls, no heels, just a wool coat and a face that had aged 10 years in 1 week. She held out a small envelope. "I won't stay," she said quietly. "Your father won't speak. Grant's left. I just wanted to return this." Inside was the dinner napkin I'd left at Eldon's grave, washed, pressed, folded. "You were right," she said. "That roof was never ours." I nodded. She looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't. She turned and walked down the steps, disappearing into the dark. I closed the door gently behind her. Later that night, I sat in the old armchair by the window. Rain had started again, just a soft pattering, not angry this time, almost tender. It tapped the roof like it trusted it would hold. I looked up at the ceiling. Not pretty, not expensive, but mine. "All my life I thought roofs were gifts," I murmured. "Turns out, they're promises, the kind you build yourself." Streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement. The faucet didn't leak. The room was quiet. I turned toward the empty air in front of me, the way one does when the story feels like it needs a closing line, even if no one's there. Family doesn't always build you a roof. Sometimes they teach you how to stand in the rain until you can build your own. I paused, then asked what I hoped someone, somewhere, would hear. "What would you have done in my shoes?" Outside, the wind picked up, but inside, everything held. This isn't a story about houses. It's about what keeps us standing when the roof falls in.